Okay, so we're going to go straight to the big topics. As a cross-cultural psychologist, which you'll have to explain to us exactly what it is, what are the biggest forces that you see changing relationships in our time?
So I look at how relationships change as they are affected by big cultural shifts. And the cultural shifts that I've traditionally looked at is migration, forced migration, and voluntary migration. How does this change the way people relate, what they expect from their relationships, how they structure their relationships, and the meaning they give to them? I look at mixed marriages, racial, cultural, and religious intermarriage, which are also people who are in cultural transition, but it happens in their own living room. And I look at what happens to relationship when the political regime changes, like the fall of communism, or the shift from collectivist to individualistic societies, which means the shift from relationships that have been traditionally structured around duty and obligation and loyalty to relationship models that are much more centered around free choice, individual fulfillment, pleasure, and happiness. So that's as a start.
So let's take it, that's a pretty big opening. Let's start unpacking one after the other. So let's talk first about the changes across different countries and different states. For instance, you just came back from Denmark.
Yes.
When you saw a country that's very different than the US in their values and socialism approach to things, yet what do you learn about relationships there?
Well, it's a very interesting thing. I just went to India, Argentina, Denmark, and Belgium. And that gives you a good sense of cultural shifts. And the question I had in Denmark, every country kind of organizes itself around the central question for me. Here is this country that doesn't have any of the stressors that a typical marriage in the United States may have. They have affordable childcare, they have maternity leave, they have paternity leave, mandatory paternity leave for that matter, they have free education and free health, and their divorce rate is utterly rampant. Why? What is still not good there? Why are they still so? And, you know, so I go from that probably the most egalitarian society together with Sweden. And then I compare that with Argentina a month before. And I compare that with India just before that. And I look at, is a marriage between two individuals or between two families? That's one big one. Who owns the sexuality of women? Who controls the education of the children? Is there a way out of relational misery? Or is the only way out that you die sooner? Which was the model that we had here not too long ago. You know, what are the power dynamics, and how do the power dynamics mirror a more kind of confrontational, overt model that you have in the more egalitarian societies versus the more indirect model of power in which you don't wield public power, but you have a way indirectly to know how to make the person believe that they do exactly what they want when they're in fact doing exactly what you want.
So let's talk about specific type of relationships. We, in the US, have kind of a standard model relationship. We get married at a certain age. We think that we're going to be married for a certain amount of time. This changes.
No, this has changed.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, when do you think, what's ahead of us? And what would be your advice to a couple that's right now getting into this?
Right. So I am still a therapist on a daily basis. I think if you look at the States, you probably could take three major segments. You could look at the traditional marriage, the boomer marriage, and the millennial marriage, grosso modo. You know, the marriage which was very much centered around the family, a marriage that didn't have divorce laws, a marriage that didn't have adultery laws, a marriage in which basically you got married for the first time for life, a marriage where you had sex for the first time. Today, a marriage is when you have stopped having sex with others. You know, a marriage where monogamy was one person for life. Today, monogamy is one person at a time. And people tell you that they are monogamous in all their relationships, and this makes perfect sense. A marriage in which women stayed in order to preserve the family, and basically because they didn't have the alternative choice. We know worldwide that when divorce is an option, it's women who take the option. And then from there you go to the boomer. This is very gross, but and what you have for the first time is contraception. You have feminism, you have the gay rights movement, and you have contraception. And you have probably one of the biggest shifts, which is the changing meaning of sexuality in marriage. Until then, it was a procreation model, and it was a marital duty for women. And now it becomes no longer just sexuality is not just a feature of our biology, a part of our condition, but now it becomes a part of our identity. And now it becomes something I define, I choose, I create a lifestyle around, I attach values to, and we have a model of sexuality that is organized around the concept of desire, to want it, not just to do it because I have to. That's no longer okay. Now it's because I want to. And everybody lives under the tyranny of desire and of wanting it. And then you have another major shift, which is that for the first time, you don't just divorce because you are unhappy, but you are able to divorce because you could be happier. And that shifts the whole thing. So now, how do I know? How do I know this is good enough? How do I continue to rationalize staying or not staying? And we live twice as long as 100 years ago. And so the longevity has shifted all of that. And then you come to the millennial. And the biggest shift is that people used to marry at 22, which in the States, which was pretty much what you call the cornerstone marriage. I marry you, and together we're going to build our home. We're going to develop ourselves, our family, first child, turning the garage into a bedroom, the whole. And now we have capstone. At 29, I meet you, and I meet you, in a whole new sphere. I meet you online. I meet you with the paradox of choice. I meet you with options I never had. And I meet you with the uncertainty and the self-doubt that all these options give me. How do I know you're the one? How do I know? How do I know it's worth stopping my whole nomadic life to choose you? And, and that question cripples a lot of people. And I choose you, and now you choose me. And that, the one, has been invested with the greatest mountain of expectations a single relationship has ever been bestowed upon. And that means that you're going to be my best friend, my intellectual equal, the best parent, my trusted confidant, my passionate lover, and we're going to live twice as long, and this is going to go, seamlessly.
So we're talking about a world that has a lot of options.
Yes.
And people can choose a lot of things, and now you're telling them that what they do outside the relationship is going to be similar to the relationship. They're going to have a lot of options, and they need to learn how to choose. How do they do that? What is their advice to them?
Well, they do it. It's a very complicated thing. I mean, we know pretty much that to have 2 or 3 choices is much better than to have no choices. But to have 1,000 choices can be crippling. So it's very difficult. We all, know this wonderful new concept of FOMO, right? It's like the fear of missing out, How do I know? And the issue is that the how do I know rests only on me. I don't have the criteria of good family. I don't have the criteria of the religion. I don't have the institutional criteria that used to dictate mate choice. It's really just my heart. And my heart is a rather feeble organism. And it's a rather fragile thing to build a whole institution on. But this is what we do. And when I'm 29 and I pick you or you pick me, 29, 34, it's that whole thing. I want you, you choose me on the basis of how you recognize me. It's an act of recognition of all the hard work that I have put into this identity building. And that authenticity, so it becomes very central. And what I expect from our relationship is that you're going to help continue that growth of my authentic self so that I can climb the mountain of self-fulfillment. And this notion of the relationship in which I continue to grow, not in which just, we grow, but it's each of us individually, becomes a very new thing. And, if Apple sold you a product that fails 50% of the time, would you buy it? But this is what happens to marriage. And all over the West, it's 1 out of 2, and it's 2 out of 3 in Paris and in the big cities in Europe, and it's 65% in the second round. And yet, we have never been more romantic and never been more disillusioned about the romanticism. And so madness continues.
So let's take it one riskier question. The future. So you told me about 3 generations up to now, and we kind of see where it's going. If I were to take it further, I would say that marriage is going to change a 4th time, and we're going to see a different thing. Do you think marriage even exists in 50 years?
Yes, a version of it will exist. I mean, I think this is an institution that has changed forever. You know, for most of history, marriage had nothing to do with love. It was an economic enterprise, it was mercantile, it was a family arrangement for alliances, and actually adultery was the space for love, because marriage was too mercantile a place for that. Now we brought love to marriage, then we brought sex to love, then we brought happiness down from the heavens. First it was an option. First it was for the afterlife, then it became an option. Now it's a mandate, you know, and you have to be happy in your marriage. Tell this to your grandmothers, you know, because in the past, marriage gave you the basis from which to leap out and to go find the happiness, right? So what will change? You know, I think people are always surprised when they end their relationships that they are reminded that it actually is an economic enterprise. So I think a number of things will happen. We're going to start to have endings that are not just a sign of failure. There needs to be a way to end this thing and still think it was good and successful, rather than just thinking that longevity is success and longevity means the funeral home. That's the first thing. The reality doesn't match the experience of the people. I think that there's going to be more and more friendship parenting, meaning people who will partner with someone with whom to make family without necessarily making couple. In any event, half the people are raising children with somebody they can't stand. So why not do this from the start with somebody that they are more likely not to get into a grievance with? You know, and these things always sound weird when you present them, because everybody lives very much in the moment thinking the model of today is flawed, but the other alternatives are worse. And in fact, the model has all the time shifted. I think, you know, what's interesting is that marriage, in terms of family, has already shifted primarily. I mean, you have single-parent families, gay families, accordion families, long-distance families. You have loads of models for families. It's the couple that has remained remarkably monolithic. You're going to have models of coupledom that are going to be a return to a community style. We call them polyamory, but what they really are is a return to a community style. What does it mean? It means that you're not just asking one person to give you what once an entire community or village used to provide. And you once again redistribute the needs. At this point, the challenge of this enterprise is that there is one person to whom you turn for everything. And then when it doesn't work, you don't question the model. You just think you chose the wrong person. I'll do better next time. And so it will evolve, you know. People still need units of some sort to create families. They'll be nuclear, they'll be extended, or they'll be more fluid and flexible, which is what we're going to, like we do in industry, like we do in any other larger economy. The larger economy has shifted from a model of production to a model of service. Well, the marital economy is also a service economy. Intimacy, hot sex, communication, connection, deep attachment, those are services. Those are not production economy anymore, you know, where you need 10 kids to work the land. So we mirror that, and we do it by having more flexibility, by having fluidity, and by understanding that most likely we are going to have 2 or 3 relationships, marriages in our adult life anyway, and some of us will do it with the same person.
So this takes us quickly to the topic that you're spending a lot of time thinking about right now, which is affairs.
Yeah.
So affairs is a break of the trust in the one that you chose first, not because you agreed to have multiple, because you actually kind of escaped the one that you're in right now.
The break of trust is a Western definition. The rest of the world sees it as a break of contract. It's not the same.
So I was going to ask you, so what are the flags, red flags that people, that you are aware of that indicate that you're about to have this kind of change in the contract that you made before? What should I be aware of if I think that it's about to change?
Is this an affair prevention question?
I think so. I think what we're interested in is learning about things that could help us maybe prevent that?
Yes.
Or also identifying something is falling apart and you can maybe fix it?
I think maybe
I'm taking notes.
This is a whole book I'm in the middle of finishing now. I think that maybe before we even look at the prevention, what would be important to say is that adultery has existed since marriage was invented. And so too the taboo against it. They have kind of traveled together all along. And sometimes, yes, there are certain things you know that that are signs of distress in a relationship. What are signs of distress today? And before I even answer that, I also would want to say that, to study infidelity is a lens, into societies and into meanings of power structures. I mean, infidelity has always been primarily an imposition, not infidelity, monogamy or fidelity has been primarily an imposition on women in order to know who gets the cows and whose children one should feed. It had nothing to do with love. That's another big change. It was purely patrimony and lineage. And that double standard still exists in most parts of the world. So on some level, when I see signs of female infidelity, I see signs of rising power of women. This is the biggest challenge to patriarchy, is give the woman a car and then you'll see what she really wants to do. If you just think she's the domestic creature and he's the natural roamer, then you ask yourself, then why is she locked up everywhere? She's not going anywhere. Maybe that's not so much the case. So now, distress in a couple, it's multiple. I mean, there are, in our system, where we expect intimacy to be a central organizing factor of modern relationships. And the intimacy is not just we live together, we share the vicissitudes of everyday life, we work the land, we raise our children. The intimacy is intimacy. And intimacy means that I share with you my inner life. And you are receptive to it, interested by it. You validate it. You basically help me transcend my existential aloneness by this intimacy. And the breakdown of modern love, often when people come into a therapist's office and they say, we don't communicate, what they're talking about is we no longer see into each other. That estrangement and the sense of aloneness or solitude or loneliness in the presence of another is worse than to be alone on one's own. Because if you are alone, you don't have the wish that the person that's next to you would be different. If you are alone next to somebody, you are partly helpless and partly enraged. And so what is the whole infidelity story? It's very little about sex, actually, contrary to what often it seems to be. It really is a story of desire. An affair is an erotic plot. The one word all over the world people tell you when they have an affair is that they feel alive. That is the word. And the alive means somebody is interested in me, somebody is attracted to me, somebody thinks I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm useful, I'm worthy. And that affirmation is what will lead some people to break the biggest rules they have imposed on themselves while they continue to believe in monogamy and while their behavior is completely in conflict with their values. So what is the prevention is, if most, there's a lot of entrepreneurs here. I find myself telling many partners in marriages or relationships, if you treated your partner like you treat your customers, your marriage would do really well. Because entrepreneurs and people who work with clients understand the charm, the attention, the presence, the focus, the listening, the empathy. And this is what this intimacy is made of. So if you gave that quality of attention to your partner and vice versa, you would do a good infidelity prevention job.
So you brought me to the last topic I was going to talk about, which is translating your work on the relationship between partners in you call it the bedroom, to the boardroom. So you take it beyond just the people who actually live together, but also work together.
Yes.
What similarities you see between the way we think about the world when you can be fired from the job anytime, there's no loyalty anymore in the company, people change positions every 3 years. When you experience this thing, how should people think about relationships in the context of
Well,
this?
if you feel disposable and you can easily be downsized and you feel so quickly irrelevant, you can imagine how your love relationships become the sanctuary where somebody is going to be offering you a refuge from all that devaluation. And the reason, I think that a lot of co-founders and a lot of business relationships, I'm going to say it in two different ways. The first thing I would say is this. As a relationship professional, expert, whatever one calls this, for most years in the past, coming into industry, coming into corporate world, and talking about relationships was usually done when there was a crisis, which is almost like marriage therapy. They always come too late. You wish they had come a little bit sooner. So you are a crisis person. The time we finally think about a relationship is when the shit hits the fan. And this is shifting. This is changing. I'm an advisor to a number of startups on the relationships from the beginning. Somebody understood. In the same way that relationships is no longer soft and an aside that you just bring a consultant in once in a while, the service economy completely understands the importance of relational intelligence. And people are looking for emotional intelligence, for an ability to listen, for an ability to be communicative, for an ability to work in teams, to be collaborative. All the words that we've seen on the screen here this whole day are relationship concepts, and they require a relational attitude. So for once, we, the people who work on the relationships, we are now seen as central and not as a periphery. Then you understand that you can have good numbers, meet your quotas, do good sales, but if the relationships collapse, 65% of startups collapse because the relationships collapsed. That is an enormous number, which means, and if you have a collapse in the relationship of one company, you know that when you go creating the next company, you also carry your divorces in your head. So, and same with when you let somebody go. The person that you let go, you can be sure that the person who was hired instead of Eric was a default person for Eric. He was the person who had all the attributes that the person who left before didn't have. And the attributes generally shift between somebody who is excellent in structure versus somebody who is excellent in fluidity and flexibility. Somebody who is very good with people gets replaced by somebody who's very good with tasks and projects. And it's always this kind of dance, and there are a few other of these complementarities. So one of the things that you see is there's a word that people are applying to work today, if you can afford it. These are privileged concepts, but people want to experience passion in their work. People want to experience meaning in their work. They want purpose, they want experience, they want relevance. At least this is what a conference like PopTech talks about. And it's not the only one. It's like, and partly because if you're not going to get the meaning and the connection and the sense of belonging and the purpose from larger community institutions, primarily religion, you need to get it from personal endeavors. And one of these personal endeavors is work. And the same words are applied to work that are applied to romantic relationships. We want purpose, we want an experience, we want a meaningful experience, we want to go home at night and feel like we did something. The problem is that for many of the people who succeed in doing this at work, what they bring home is the leftovers. So the challenge is, how can you have two enlightened and heightened experiences in two places that demand so much from us?
20 minutes passed like this with you. It feels like I just asked you two questions and we started. Let me ask you one thing as a preview for your evening fireside chat.
Yes.
What question do you get asked the most? I know you travel all over the world and you do panels with people. What things people ask you the most? Is there one question people are all traveled by, or it's totally different between gay, straight, India, US?
The young people say, when do you know when you found the right one? The older people say, when do you know when it's time to go?
So I guess I'm the old.
Older in stages of relationships. The India people, I had the most fascinating talk on how do you straddle Tinder and arranged marriages. Here is a very interesting one. When I did this talk, this series of master classes for therapists working on infidelity, and I would ask people just to free associate to the word. And in the United States, I can ask, and I will probably get 50 words before somebody finally says the word love. In Argentina, it's probably number 2 or 3. Jealousy barely appears here. Egalitarian societies don't accept jealousy anymore. You're not jealous, you're angry. You know, it's a different feeling because you're not allowed to experience possessiveness. Possessiveness is an arcane remainder of patriarchy. So, you know, you have these questions. So the questions go, you know, will marriage survive? Is an affair a deal breaker? How important is sex anyway? Can a woman not have children and not have to justify herself for her choice? How do we deal with female sexism, whereby women at home also experience a kind of a double standard by which they ultimately believe they still do it better, and so they end up being resentful that they have to do both, home and work, but can't really relegate it? How do you really change the mentalities? I mean, with all the egalitarian... I just came from Europe yesterday, and, you know, everybody's watching the Trump election and Trump-Clinton election, and it's like, you know, how is it possible that this society, supposedly enlightened and, you know, that pretends it is not as machistic as others, gets away with a candidate who, you know, pretends it's locker room talk? And of course, you know, in a locker room, you never hear a man tell you that a woman wants to grab him every night and he's not interested. That man remains silent. So we know that when it comes to sex, men are socialized all over the world to brag, to exaggerate, to lie. And women are also taught to lie, but by minimizing and by denying and by underrepresenting. And so, plus ça change and moins ça change. It's like somehow you think some of these things by now would already have found a more evolved state, and then you get one of these scandals and you go right back and you realize, you know, archaic ideas circulate everywhere, even in the elite spheres.
If you want to know the answers to the 5 top questions, you're going to hear a lot of that tonight at 9 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you.